The Ethereum pantheon had ruled the outer arm of the galaxy for 4,000 years. They called themselves gods, and for 4,000 years, no species had found a reason to argue with the name. Their fleets did not lose battles. Their fleets ended wars before the second engagement, sometimes before the first shot was ever confirmed as a shot, and not simply a formality. 91 species had entered a war against the pantheon across 4 millennia. 91 species had signed terms of ascension within a decade of that war beginning. Some had signed within a year. The fastest surrender on record, the Corvin Directorate, had taken 11 days. The pantheon did not use the word conquest. Their treaties used the word elevation. You stopped being a lesser species, burdened by scarcity and disease and the slow arithmetic of biological death, and you became a client species, permitted to exist under the light of beings who had transcended all three. Ascendants did not age in any visible way after their transition. They did not fear injury the way baseline species feared it, because pantheon medical science could rebuild a body from a fragment of spine. They had, over 4,000 years, developed a very specific kind of confidence, the confidence of a species that has genuinely never lost. Their capital worlds were monuments to that confidence. Their fleets were built not merely to win wars, but to make the outcome of a war self-evident before it began, so that violence itself became almost unnecessary. A formality performed for species too proud or too foolish to read the numbers correctly. Diplomats joked, in the particular tired way diplomats joke about things they've stopped finding funny, that negotiating with the pantheon wasn't diplomacy. It was notification. The pantheon's own historians, in their more candid academic writings, described this pattern not as conquest, but as inevitability made administrative. War with the pantheon was, in the pantheon's own textbooks, less a military campaign than a scheduling matter, a question of how quickly a client species would come to understand what every prior client species had eventually understood, and sign the paperwork accordingly. The War College on Threnody Prime, the pantheon's oldest and most storied military academy, had for 3,000 years taught a single foundational doctrine to every cadet in their first term. The outcome of a pantheon engagement is known before the engagement begins. The only variable is how much of the losing side survives to be elevated. It was a doctrine that had never, in 3,000 years of instruction, required a footnote. In 4,000 years, exactly one species had never signed those terms. That species had fought the pantheon for 4 years, on a scale the pantheon's War College later described, in an internal assessment never meant to become public, but which would become extremely public before this story ends, as statistically anomalous in every measurable category. The assessment had been commissioned specifically because the war's outcome did not resolve the way pantheon wars resolved. There was no formal surrender. There was no signed elevation. There was, instead, a ceasefire negotiated not because the human species had been defeated, but because the pantheon's own military command had quietly, internally, run out of confident explanations for what their fleet logs were showing them. That species' delegation to the peace summit on Station Corinth consisted of one man. The pantheon had, in the months of preparation leading up to the summit, assumed this was a diplomatic slight. A species too disorganized, too resource-poor, or too indifferent to send a proper delegation of ambassadors, aides, and military liaisons, the way every other species in galactic memory had always done. Chancellor Emin's staff had raised the question twice in planning sessions, wondering aloud whether the summit should be delayed until Earth's government dispatched a delegation befitting the occasion. Emin had read the file by then. She told her staff not to worry about it. His name was Aidan Voss, 34 years old, born in a farming town outside a city that, by the time this summit convened, no longer existed, not destroyed, simply absorbed into the sprawl of a rebuilding world that had grown too large for the old maps to still make sense. The Pantheon's intelligence division had a file on him. It was, by their own internal classification, a Tier 1 file, the designation reserved for individuals whose service record required independent verification before it could be officially logged, because the first submission produced numbers that read, to the reviewing officer, like an administrative error. Chancellor Emin, senior mediator of the Threshold Accord and the Pantheon's own appointed chair for the summit, had read that file 11 times, not because she doubted it, because each reading produced a slightly different reaction in her, and she had learned, across a long career of reading files that were supposed to explain people, that a file worth reading 11 times was usually a file that was underselling its subject rather than overselling him. The verification had come back confirmed. 3 times. 3 independent Pantheon audit branches, each unaware the other 2 had been assigned the same task, had each returned the same numbers. Aidan Voss had not corrected any of the confusion himself. He had not, in fact, engaged with the file at all. He had simply arrived on Station Corinth 2 days before the summit's opening reception, found his assigned quarters, smaller than the quarters given to junior aides on other delegations, though he never mentioned this, and spent that first evening doing what he had spent most evenings doing for the last 4 years. Cleaning a rifle that had not been fired in 6 years and did not, by any technical measure, need to be cleaned at all. He did not introduce himself to anyone on the station. He did not need to. The introduction had already been written, 4 years earlier, in a language of engagement reports and confirmed kills that he had never once volunteered to discuss. Before the war, Aidan Voss had been, by every available record, an unremarkable man. He had grown grain on land his family had worked for 3 generations. He had no formal military education beyond the compulsory 2-year defense service every citizen of his region completed at 18, a program that, by Pantheon Academy standards, barely qualified as basic orientation. His pre-war file, the one his admissions officer had originally cross-referenced before the war changed what that file would eventually contain, listed no distinctions of any kind. Average marksmanship scores, average physical assessments, a note from an instructor who would later be killed in the war's 2nd year, describing him only as quiet, attentive, does not need to be told things twice. What the war had done to that unremarkable man was, according to every psychological profile the Pantheon's intelligence division had attempted to compile on him. And there were, by the summit's start, 11 separate attempts, essentially unknowable from the outside. He had simply gotten, methodically and without any visible interruption in his demeanor, extraordinarily good at a specific and narrow set of tasks the war required of him, and had continued getting better at them for 4 consecutive years without any of the burnout, hesitation, or escalating recklessness. The Pantheon's own combat psychologists insisted, as a matter of established science, should have appeared by the 18-month mark in any biological soldier operating at his sustained level of engagement. He had simply kept doing the work. That, more than any single number in his file, was what unsettled the analysts who studied him. Gods, in the Pantheon's own understanding of themselves, were made through transcendence, through leaving something behind. Aidan Voss appeared to have become what he was by staying exactly, stubbornly the same person the entire time. The summit's opening reception was where the Pantheon's officer class did what officer classes across every species in galactic history have always done before a negotiation. They measured the room. It happened in a vast hall aboard Station Corinth, glass-ceilinged, built specifically for occasions like this one, where powers that had recently stopped shooting at each other were expected to stand in the same space and drink the same wine and pretend the last 4 years had been a disagreement rather than a war. Voss Gale, 3rd rank ascendant, War Marshal of the Pantheon's Reclamation Fleet, decorated victor of the Second Cinder Campaign, a campaign taught, in abbreviated form, in every Pantheon War College as a model of overwhelming coordinated force. Crossed the reception hall toward the human delegation, the way certain ascendants crossed rooms toward lesser species, with the timing and tone of someone who had already decided, well before arriving, exactly how the conversation would end. "I read your file, Mr. Voss," Vosgale said, "in the particular conversational register the Pantheon reserved for beings they considered, on some fundamental level, temporary. Quite the campaign, Earth's. 4 years. Genuinely impressive for a species that still buries its dead in dirt and calls it sacred." Several nearby ascendants smiled at that. It was not strictly an insult. Vosgale would have said, if pressed, that he meant it as a compliment, the kind of compliment a much older species gives a much younger one for punching, unexpectedly, above its weight. But the smiles around him were the specific category of smile that appears in rooms where a hierarchy is being quietly, socially reinforced. Everyone present understood which side of that hierarchy they were standing on. Everyone except, apparently, the one man the joke was actually aimed at, who did not appear to register it as a joke at all. "So," Vosgale continued, clearly savoring the shape of the question before he asked it, the way a performer savors a line they know will land. "As a professional courtesy, one soldier to another, how many gods did you personally kill?" The room did not go silent. It went interested. This was, everyone present understood, a joke, and a fairly generous one at that. The kind of question you ask a promising cadet to watch him fumble for an impressive-sounding but ultimately modest number. Gods, self-evidently, did not get killed by farmers with rifles. The question was rhetorical in the way a magic trick is rhetorical. You already know there's no rabbit. You just want to watch someone fail to produce one, and enjoy how gracefully or clumsily they fail. Chancellor Emine, standing near the head of the gathering with a drink she had not touched, said nothing. She had been waiting for a version of this exact question since the second day of her preparation for the summit. The day she pulled Aidan Voss's full combat record for the first time and sat with it, alone, in her office, understanding with a very particular kind of stillness that she was not mediating the peace summit she had thought she was mediating. Beside Vosgale, a younger ascendant, a junior attaché who had not yet learned when silence was the more useful posture, leaned in with a grin. "Go on, then. Give the man his moment. I'm sure it's a respectable number for his species." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the small cluster of officers, the kind of laughter that costs nothing and asks for nothing in return except agreement. Across the hall, a handful of delegates from other client species, beings who had themselves signed terms of elevation generations ago, and had long since absorbed the Pantheon's own instincts about hierarchy as their own, watched with the mild, detached interest of an audience that already suspects how the scene will resolve and is simply waiting to be proven right. Voss did not look at the junior attaché. He did not look at the small ripple of laughter. He set down the drink he, too, had not been drinking, and gave Vosgale his full and unhurried attention, the way a man gives attention to a question he intends to actually answer. "That's a fair question," Voss said. He said it in the tone of someone who genuinely found it fair, because he did. There was no irony in his voice, no awareness that anything about the moment was unusual. "Do you want the confirmed number or the total?" The smiles around the circle held a half-second longer than they should have. The particular half-second where a smile hasn't yet been told it's wrong, but has started, faintly, to suspect it. "The total," Vosgale said, still amused, still entirely certain of the shape this was about to take. Voss said a number. The smiles stopped, not gradually. The way a wave stops. The ones closest to him first, then spreading outward through the hall in a widening ring, until the entire reception's ambient noise seemed to physically retreat from the space around the table, leaving something that was not quite silence but was very close to it. Chancellor Emine opened a case file that had been sitting closed on the small table beside her for the entire reception, waiting. I don't believe a number by itself carries the weight it should, she said, her voice carrying easily now into the hush. So before this summit begins in earnest tomorrow, I've taken the liberty of pulling the confirmed engagement logs. All of it verified against Pantheon black box telemetry, not human sources, not human claims. I'm going to walk through 7 of them. There are considerably more than 7. The first was documentary footage, not simulation, not reconstruction, raw black box recovery from a downed Ascendant-class dreadnought's internal security grid. A single human figure moved through a flooding lower deck, past a security detail of 6 enhanced Pantheon soldiers, and reached the reactor core in under 90 seconds. It was not dramatic in the way Academy training simulations were dramatic. It was quiet, procedural, almost administrative in its efficiency. The visual signature of someone who had done this enough times that the fear had long since been replaced by muscle memory. The second was audio only. A Pantheon fleet commander's final transmission, 40 encrypted seconds, translated live across the hall's display. Coordinates, a request for reinforcement that never arrived in time, and then nothing. The third was a casualty report from the Cinder campaign itself, Vosgale's own celebrated victory, cross-referenced against a separate human incursion log filed the same week, from the opposite side of the same battle. 3 Ascendant command staff, listed in the Pantheon's official record as combat losses attributable to unfortunate but unremarkable circumstance, matched exactly, name for name, against 3 confirmed engagements in Aiden Voss's service history. The fourth was longer, an extended sequence from a besieged frontier outpost, 17 human defenders against a Pantheon detachment 3 times their number, filmed from a Pantheon reconnaissance drone that had, at the time, been recording the engagement purely as a training reference for future campaigns. It had never been used for that purpose. It had instead been quietly filed, then quietly buried, then, as of tonight, quietly unburied. The fifth was shorter still. A single still frame, time-stamped, showing Voss alone in a corridor that Pantheon architecture logs confirmed had, minutes earlier, held an entire tactical response unit. By the 6th case, Vosgale was not smiling. He was watching with the specific expression of someone performing a calculation that was going to take considerably longer than the reception to finish, and was already beginning to suspect the answer would not be comfortable. By the 7th, the hall had gone fully, completely silent, not the tense, charged silence of an ongoing negotiation, but the flatter, heavier silence of an audience that has only just understood the true shape of the room it walked into an hour earlier, believing it already knew. There are 41 more logged engagements, Emin said, closing the file gently, almost with something like courtesy. I don't think we need them tonight. Vosgale stood without moving for what felt, in that quiet hall, like a very long time. When he finally spoke again, the register he had opened the evening with, easy, certain, faintly amused, was entirely gone. The confirmed number, he said slowly, working through it aloud, and the total. They're different by roughly 100 and N. They are, Voss said. He wasn't looking at Vosgale when he said it. He was crouched down, checking the strap on the rifle case at his feet, the one he'd carried in from the shuttle 2 days earlier and had not, in all that time, opened once. Vosgale left the hall without another word to anyone. Not humiliated, recalibrated. A man walking out of a room holding a number he understood, with total clarity, he was going to be doing arithmetic with for a very long time. Voss picked up the rifle case and stood. You could have told me before the reception, he said to Emin, without any particular edge in it, more observation than complaint. I could have, Emin agreed, but you would have downplayed it. You always do. I've read every transcript from every debriefing you've ever given, Mr. Voss, and every single one of them undersells what actually happened by at least half. I needed this room to hear a true number tonight, not a modest one. Voss considered that for a moment, then nodded once, the particular nod of a man conceding a fact he can't argue with because it happens to be accurate. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Emin said, "the Pantheon negotiates. Properly this time. Not from 4,000 years of assumed superiority. From an actual accounting of what happened in that war on both sides in full." She paused, studying him for a moment the way she had studied his file that first night, not looking for something hidden, but simply looking, the way a person looks at something they have finally been given permission to see clearly. "May I ask you something?" she said, "off the record, not for the summit." Voss shifted the rifle case slightly under his arm. "You can ask. Why did you let it stand for 4 years? The confusion, the assumption that Earth was negligible. You could have corrected it at any point. A single confirmed engagement report, released publicly, would have changed how every species in this hall approached the negotiating table from day one." Voss was quiet for a moment, the same unhurried quiet that had characterized every pause in the conversation so far. "Because it wasn't the point," he said finally. "The number was never the point. Staying alive was the point. Getting the next outpost through the next week was the point. I didn't fight 4 years to be believed. I fought 4 years so there'd be a 5th one to have this conversation in." Emin didn't respond to that immediately. There wasn't, she found, an immediate response that seemed adequate to it. "Then let the record reflect that you didn't ask for tonight either," she said eventually. "I did that. If it changes anything for you going forward, that responsibility is mine, not yours." "I know," Voss said. "I'm not upset about it. I'd have done the same in your position." He shifted the case again, a small, practical motion, the motion of a man who has somewhere else to be and is not going to pretend otherwise out of politeness. "Is there anything else the summit needs from me tonight?" "No," Emin said. "Tomorrow there will be considerably more. Tonight, no." "Then I'll say good night, Chancellor." "Good night, Mr. Voss." Voss walked out through the same doors Vosskale had used minutes earlier, though he took considerably longer over it, in no particular hurry. The rifle case under his arm was the same one he had carried onto his first military transport 4 years before, scuffed hard at both corners. The strap replaced twice. The only object from that war he had chosen, deliberately, to keep. Behind him in the emptying hall, Chancellor Emin finished her entry in the summit record, read it back once, and set the file aside.